Good afternoon. The time is now 4:09 p.m. The Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for April 22nd, 2024 will please come to order. Let's go around the table for roll call introductions. We'll start from my right.
Heidi Cater,
Sheila Pryor,
Dan Ginestra.
Valentina Ayers.
Sarah Johansson.
Chase Anderson.
Milind Sohoni. Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. First, we have the finance and operations reports from Scott Lesage, our Executive Director of Finance and Operations. The first item on that agenda is the Birchwood Reconstruction Stormwater Pond Proposal and will be presented by the City of Plymouth representatives.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair and Directors. On behalf of the city, thank you for allowing us to present in front of you today regarding the Birchwood Estates Street Reconstruction Project. I'm Mike Payne. I am the city's city engineer and Deputy Public Works Director. With me, I have Ben Sharon Brock, our Water Resources Supervisor, as well as Mike Waltman with Bolton and Mink, the city's engineer for the project. This project is located in the neighborhood just north of Central Middle School. It involves 4th Avenue, 5th Avenue, Comstock, Weston, and Black Oaks Lanes. The project is slated to address the aged street and water main in the neighborhood. Proposed improvements with the project include full reconstruction of streets, completely removing the street, all supporting materials, installing a new street that meets the city's engineering guidelines, with concrete curb and gutter, replacement of the existing aged water main system with new water main and services for residents, installation of storm sewer. There's minimal storm sewer in the neighborhood, and this project would also replace some storm sewer in poor condition that does drain to a wetland on Central Middle School site in the northwest corner, as well as water quality improvements. Why water quality? The biggest driver for water quality improvements with the project are the city's permitting requirements. And the driver for that is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency MS4 general permit. MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. And with large reconstruction type projects that disturb a lot of area, that's where this permit comes in. For roadway projects, it's over 1 acre of disturbance. And if you do disturb more than 1 acre, then you're required to provide treatment over based on the amount of impervious surface or the roadway surface that is in the project area. And based on those requirements, we're required to treat almost 9,000 cubic feet of treatment, or 8,750 cubic feet. And other goals with this is Gleason Lake's total maximum daily load. Gleason Lake is listed as impaired forest phosphorus, and this improvement would help address that, as well as environmental stewardship, which is a Plymouth City Council strategic theme. This layout shows the drainage areas in the existing, or in the neighborhood. There's 3 drainage areas. The largest drains to the south to an existing wetland on Central Middle School's site. And that is done by a storm sewer shown in green on the map before you. That is aged storm sewer. It's an old metal pipe that does need to be replaced. To meet the permitting requirements and provide for water quality, the city's proposing to install a stormwater treatment pond, roughly $180,000 to construct. It provides almost 16,000 cubic feet of treatment, so it exceeds and meets the requirements of the permit for the project. It also removes roughly 2,000 pounds of total suspended solids or sediment, as well as 6.5 pounds of phosphorus. And that would go towards the Gleason Lake TMDL goals for the lake. The stormwater pond offers simplified maintenance. Once installed and established, it's on the city schedule for inspection every 5 years. And maintenance would really just entail excavation once it fills up with enough sediment. Once it reaches half capacity, and we anticipate that to occur roughly every 20 to 30 years. it does require an easement from the school district to install. And this would include replacement of the storm sewer that is in poor condition that drains to the wetland. The chart before you is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency compliance flow chart. It's for the MS4 permit, and it just details the steps the city goes through for permitting for this project. As at the top, the question asks, do you disturb more than 1 acre? Yes. Will the project result in more than 1 acre of new and fully reconstructed impervious area or roadway? Yes. Does your project meet the definition of a linear project or a roadway? Which, yes. Then the next step is calculating the treatment required. That's the 8,750 cubic feet. Then the next step is, do you have the right-of-way necessary to treat the full volume through infiltration? And the city does not. Can additional easement or right-of-way or other permission be obtained to infiltrate the full water quality volume or the full treatment? Yes. Is infiltration prohibitive on this site? Which it is. So next step is, can the full volume be treated through a filtration basis, stormwater pond, or other means? Yes. And then that just leads us to where we're at, is the proposal to install a stormwater treatment pond on the site. Here is a layout of the stormwater treatment pond itself. It is in the northwest corner of the Central Middle School site. It is in a mix of wooded area and open area. There's a green line on towards the bottom. That is the surveyed boundary of the forest edge. And the dark blue line is the original construction limits of the pond. Based off the feedback that we've received from neighborhoods, we did reduce the limits to try to limit impacts to the trees as much as possible and to keep as much screening as possible. So the lighter purple line is the revised limits, and as you can see, we're still leaving some trees on the northern edge adjacent to the residents. And through the middle of the pond, you see the new storm sewer line. That is replacing the old storm sewer that is in poor condition that needs to be replaced. The existing storm sewer is shown in red towards the top. That does drain across private property and into the existing wetland outside of easement area. There is no treatment on the site currently, so that's what this stormwater pond is proposed to do. Here are photos of the proposed location for the stormwater treatment pond. The first one is the eastern edge. This is the boundary of the existing forest and the open area. It's kind of a high point currently. Then is a picture of the interior, and as well as, you know, some brush piles we've seen in there. The understory is full of buckthorn. We did have the city's forester take a look at the forest impacted by the proposed stormwater pond. It's predominantly large declining basswoods, also includes some elm trees, ash trees, and a few oaks. Emerald ash borer is present, and the ash trees are generally infested. Buckthorn is present in significant quantities in the understory of the forest. And the proposed pond location on the forest edge doesn't significantly increase the amount of forest fragmentation, and that's kind of the leading factor of long-term forest decline. And our Parks and Forestry staff, along with our Public Works staff, have committed to providing recommendations for replacing plants and shrubs that would help provide screening to the adjacent properties after the stormwater pond is installed. And here's just a slide of the tree inventory that our forestry staff took, and the trees with the red dots are confirmed emerald ash borer. The city's project team did take a look at alternatives to treating the stormwater other than a stormwater pond. One alternative was underground storage, or storage chambers that are buried outside of the roadway that collect stormwater. There'd be 4 locations shown in purple boxes on the map before you. Roughly $300,000 to construct, provides 8,600 cubic feet of treatment, which is close but slightly less to the required volume for the project to meet permitting guidelines. There's more extensive maintenance with the underground chambers. The city would need to go out there, pop the covers, take a look at them, back out any sediment that's in them. So it is more extensive than just visiting the pond every 20 to 30 years to excavate sediment. Requires easement from multiple properties, 5 residential properties with associated tree impacts and impacts to private property. Easement would also still be needed from Wayzata School District to replace the existing storm sewer that is in need of repair. At the January 23rd Plymouth City Council meeting, council directed staff to further investigate this alternative. So staff submitted offers to purchase easement from the 5 impacted property owners, and the city did not receive an affirmative response from those property owners. Another alternative evaluated was rain gardens, approximately $285,000 to construct. 19 rain gardens are needed to meet permitting requirements. And the map before you, color-coded, shows based off of topographic conditions, what properties would be provide a high probability for treatment, receiving a lot of water, moderate probability, and low probability. So 19 rain gardens would pretty much include every property that was identified as a high probability and would need some median moderate probability as well. So just the sheer amount of them isn't a great solution to provide for treatment. The city also contracts out maintenance for these rain gardens, $300 to $400 per rain garden annually. So $6,000 to $76,000 or $7,600 a year for maintenance. Right of entries would be needed from all these property owners for temporary construction impacts to install the rain gardens. And the city would still need easement from the Wayzata School District to replace the storm sewer that drains to the wetland on the Central Middle School site. As an alternative, if the district does not want to grant the easement for the stormwater treatment pond, the city would still need to obtain an easement to replace its aged infrastructure or its aged storm sewer that does drain to the wetland. Here's a layout of what that would look like. A 20-foot easement just to get the storm sewer in into the wetland. So yeah, the easement is still needed. Impacts are smaller than the full stormwater pond. And with this option, no stormwater treatment is provided. And I'll touch a little bit on schedule here. So this project went before Plymouth City Council on January 23rd, 2024. Also went before council on March 26, 2024, where the public hearing was held. The project was approved at the city's public hearing on March 26. Our contractor, it looks like they are anticipating a start date of later May, early June. Construction would take the substantial part of 2024, probably to about October-ish. And then 2025 would be final touch-ups, including the final layer of pavement on the roadway and just restoration. And with that, we will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mike. I will have my board colleagues ask questions and make comment, but I have a question about that last slide that's still on there. The May 13th school board meeting, can you elaborate on where you got that information?
Certainly, Chair and Directors. The city recognizes that's the school board's next meeting. So if the school district does require that to go before a board, that would be the next opportunity as I understand it. But I would certainly defer to the school board and staff on their internal process to process this.
I just want to make it clear that the viewers and my colleagues here do not assume that that's when we are going to discuss this at the school board meeting. So just so you're aware of that. Board colleagues, any questions or comments? Anybody?
Well, Sheila, you can go. I have a number of questions, but you can go first.
Can you explain to us the difference between the wetland that is currently there and the holding pond, how those would differ in their treatment of the water that flows into Gleason Lake?
For those specifics, I'll defer to our Water Resources Supervisor, Ben Scherenbrock.
Yeah, Board and Commissioners. So the stormwater pond is a created body of water that is meant to hold water, settle out sediments, and capture phosphorus, versus the wetland, which is a naturally occurring basin that, yes, it does the same thing. However, a stormwater pond is essentially replicating what a wetland does and provides cleaner water that drains into that wetland and ultimately downstream into whatever water body it drains into, in this case, Gleason Lake.
And I'll add to that, under the permitting guidelines, the wetlands do not count as treatment to meet the permitting requirements. And with the stormwater pond, that would treat the water prior to hitting the wetland. So it would, in essence, be providing cleaner water to the wetland itself, further improving downstream water quality.
Thank you.
So I have a series of questions. I can take turns if other people have them. So thank you, by the way, for being here, and happy Earth Day. So it's an interesting day to be having this conversation. So my first question, I'm going to build on Sheila's question. The first question is the cleanliness of the water. So do you have some data about how clean the water is? I know that there's a number of stages that it goes through right from there to, I kind of know my geography of that area of Plymouth, from there, from Central Middle School to the other side of Gleason Lake. What's the water? Do we have any idea about the quality of the water that's coming out of this wetland area as opposed to what happens to the water as it continues down the way to Gleason Lake?
Yeah, Board and Commissioners. So while we don't have direct monitoring information leading out of the wetland, we do have qualities of wetlands that have been assessed in this area. So it goes from a medium to a high to an exceptional quality wetland the closer you get to the lake. Now, in theory, that is cleaning up the water as it gets closer to the lake. However, we don't have actual monitoring data that shows that. Our engineer has modeled this, and so the numbers that Mr. Payne has presented are modeled based on a stormwater model that was created by Bolton and Menck. And Mike can speak to that if you have more questions on that.
So I'll ask a follow-up question, and I'm a social worker, not a biologist, so I'm going to ask him in that way. So I might simplify some of this a little bit. So do we have reason to believe that the area that's next, that's coming out of this naturally filtered wetland, that is the fact that it's happening naturally, that is the dirtiest part of the water, or that there is a high need to be cleaning up the water from this filtration spot at that point? Do we have evidence to support that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, like Ben mentioned, we don't have direct water quality testing at that wetland. We do know that Gleason Lake is listed as impaired for phosphorus, and this project is projected to remove, almost a ton of sediment yearly from eventually reaching Gleason Lake, as well as 6.5 pounds of phosphorus per year. So it would improve these the phosphorus and sediment from reaching Gleason Lake.
So then you can say to us that you would have a high level of confidence that building this holding pond would improve the water quality of Gleason Lake?
Directors, yes, we do have a level of confidence that this would positively impact water quality.
Okay. A couple more questions. What are the implications of, so let's talk a little bit about maybe these rain gardens, right? That might be another option. What are the implications to the daily functioning of the sewers and the area if we were to move forward with this, like using the rain gardens or something else and not building this holding pond?
Directors, so are you asking what does the rain gardens look like on a daily basis compared to storm sewer?
No, would we be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish and clean up Gleason Lake and do what we need to do without building a holding pond?
Directors, if 19 or if 19 rain gardens are constructed, that would treat a volume of water to meet permitting guidelines. However, when the city did look at all the different alternatives, for a number of reasons, that's not a recommended course of action for the city. Just for the sheer number, we need 19 of them. We did not get that level of interest from residents throughout the project. We had less than half of that interest from residents. There's additional impacts to the residents themselves, just private property impacts to get those rain gardens in. We do need permission or temporary right of entries from 19 residents to install them. That and just the added annual maintenance of that it's a less desirable alternative than the stormwater treatment pond.
Okay. And my last question is, so we're putting a pond, a pretty deep pond with concrete on the bottom right next to some baseball fields and a middle school, and we have young people, and we know that young people like to go on adventures and explore and climb some fences and other things. And so what are some of the ways that we would make sure that it would be safe as we're putting this next to our school?
Chair and directors, so the pond is just a soil bottom, so there's no concrete there. But and I'll actually go to the slide here. So we are proposing to install a chain link fence on the eastern edge of the stormwater pond to help deter that attractive nuisance of children going over there. There is also with the pond design, there is a safety bench installed on it. So an area of flatter slope, a 10 to 1 slope that allows, so there isn't the immediate drop off. So it is safer.
And will you put trees, I'm sorry, last question, so the neighbors are going to go from seeing a wetland and all of the things to a chain link fence? Is there some plans to restore some nature around that?
Chair and directors, yes. So the city is planning to install a native seed mix on the area. And then our Parks and Forestry staff, along with our engineering staff, will take a look at the area once it's constructed to install trees that are suited for the area or shrubs that are suited for the area to help provide some screening. And we are working to leave as much trees as we can adjacent to the residents. So based off this layout here, in kind of the center is the storm sewer. We do need to clear trees in that area to get the storm sewer in. But just to the west of that, there are some trees that will still remain as they currently do.
Okay, thank you for my numerous questions and answers.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. Thank you for being here and taking the time with us to understand. So I know for us what requirements and mandates mean and how we have to hold to them. So when you're talking about permitting requirements, what is the consequence of not fulfilling these?
Chair and directors, if the city would then at that point just need to document our efforts of trying to obtain the necessary easement to install the stormwater basement, and then if audited by the MPCA, we just need to provide that information to them.
Okay. I have another question if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Go ahead.
I have one more question. I have several, but I'll take turns. If you were to go the path, and I know that you previously said that there was not a lot of interest when it came to the rain gardens, if you were to take that path, and we're talking about the annual fees that it would take to maintain it, who would be responsible for paying for that?
Chair and director, the city would be responsible for those costs, and also this project was approved by Plymouth City Council with the proposed stormwater treatment pond. So if that option isn't selected, we would probably go down the route of at least trying to obtain easement to replace our infrastructure that needs to be replaced. So we'd still try to pursue the easement to replace the storm sewer. And then we would document our efforts to install the stormwater treatment pond.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a few questions, so I'm happy to take turns with other members if that's so necessary. So the first question I think that comes to mind for me is kind of this, with this storm drain, we have concrete, we have, am I correct in saying we'd have, what might be referred to as like maybe tubing or piping, kind of a plumbing apparatus, is that correct?
Chair and directors, what is currently there, it's a metal pipe about 2 feet in diameter that drains to the wetland.
Okay. And so then with this additional infrastructure that's been proposed to be built, do you tear that out? Do you keep that pipe in place? You just retrofit it to have this cement apparatus, this cement structure with that, or?
Chair and directors, the city would install new storm sewer that would fit the stormwater pond. So there would be piping that carries water from the neighborhood to the pond.
Okay.
And then there is a outlet control structure, which is kind of like a manhole that helps regulate the water. And that has piping directly out to the wetland.
Okay, and then I just 2 more questions. I appreciate everyone's patience. And this question just came to mind. My uncle's a plumber, and one thing he always talks about is like potential for backflow. So how do you plan to kind of prevent that, unwarranted or unwanted flow of water, maybe in a direction that we wouldn't desire?
Chair and directors, the storm sewer is a gravity system, so it relies on changes of elevation to flow. So it's designed to contain storms within the pond itself, and then there is an emergency overflow if we do have a very, very large storm event that would drain directly to the wetland as water currently does now.
And then my final question, as I'm sure everyone's aware, Gleason Lake is a pretty large lake, and is not solely within the municipal boundaries of the city of Plymouth. It's also within the municipal boundaries of the cities of Minnetonka and Wayzata. So kind of your interactions with them, their level of support, is this going to be a team effort? Do they have similar proposals to kind of work with you on this, or are you mainly trying to target that part that's within the city of Plymouth?
Chair and directors, getting back to what's driving this, it's the city's permitting requirements to do the street reconstruction project. So that's the driver. And the stormwater pond is intended to meet that. With that said, we do know that Gleason Lake is listed as impaired for phosphorus, and I'll defer to Ben here to talk about our efforts with other cities in treating that.
Yeah, Chair and Directors. So we work with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, who is the overall watershed district in this area, along with the cities of Minnetonka, Wayzata, to really try to get at all of our individual goals, but also the goal of getting Gleason Lake off the impaired waters list. And so projects like this, along with stream restorations and other projects that each individual city have done, all work towards that goal of reducing the amount of pollutants that are getting towards the lake, which then ultimately will help it get off the impaired waters list. So while this project it's working towards that goal, it's not in direct coordination with any other community. It's part of the larger plan of trying to meet the water quality goals for the lake.
All right, thank you.
Another thing that we heard from residents around the area is that they're concerned with when you put in a new body of water, there could be more mosquitoes and more nuisance from insects like that. Can you speak to what the city would do to help mitigate that?
Yeah, Chair and Directors. So the Metropolitan Mosquito Control District is the one that would manage these water bodies for mosquitoes. And so their plans and policies are based on their own internal mapping of what is where. However, I do know that they do target larger bodies of water, including ponds and wetlands, as part of their outreach to try to mitigate for mosquito populations. But we don't know exactly directly how this would be wrapped into that plan.
Mr. Chair, I have one more question. This question actually is for Dr. Anderson. Do we know how this will impact Central Middle School in terms of are we losing forest that the teachers use for outside classes, or are there other things maybe we're not thinking about that might make us question whether this is a whether this is good for students?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know that I come tonight prepared to respond to that question, but it would be something that we could certainly look into. I have heard from third parties that that area has been used for some classrooms, science classrooms perhaps. I may have some of my team that may have some direct information. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but if you do have any information, now would be a good time to share, but that would be something that we would look into and seek to learn more about.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so it's my turn now. I'm going to reduce I had about 9 or 10 questions. I'm going to cut that down to 3. Okay. This is a clarification question. Help me understand. I saw on slide 3, it says 8,750 cubic feet of treatment required. That's a permit that is given, right? Then slide 5 says 15,800 cubic feet of treatment with pond. Why do you need double the quantity if 8,500 or whatever that amount was is enough?
Chair and directors, that is based off of, there's the Minnesota Stormwater Manual governs stormwater treatment pond design. So that's based off of the contributing area to the pond itself. And separate from that is the MS4 general permit. So the pond is being sized for the amount of water, contributing water that goes to the pond. That just so happens to be above and beyond the permitting requirements for the project itself. So absent any permitting requirements at all, if the city were to design a stormwater treatment pond to treat this area, it would be designed to this size.
Designed to the size of 15,000 or 8,000? 15,000.
Chair and directors, that's correct.
Okay, so 15,000 is actually what's required.
That is, Chair and directors, that is what is required to properly size the stormwater treatment basin for the water contributing to it.
Okay.
That is higher than the permitting requirement.
Okay, sound good. Thank you. So the depth, from what I know about arithmetic, the pond is like a cylinder, right? You have a surface area and you have a depth. Can we reduce the surface area by going deeper, or is that not possible?
Chair and directors, I'll defer to our city's engineer on that one.
Good evening, Chair and Directors. Great question. That is in fact what we did. We originally had a larger pond design. Engineer Payne shared the former construction limits that were a little bit larger. We did shrink it up and make it as deep as we could while still keeping it safe with that safety bench that Engineer Payne also.
So you reach the limits of the depth, basically?
Yes.
Okay. Does the easement come under the eminent domain law, which gives the city power to take private property for public use, as long as the residents get just compensation? Does that come under that eminent domain law?
Chair and directors, the city looks to work collaboratively with the school district as we have in the past with many easement acquisitions for both sides. So we extended an offer to purchase the easement with the hope that the city or the school district would sell it to the city. We do not intend to conduct.
Okay. All right, and then let me ask you one more question here.
Can I ask you one question in the meantime?
Let me finish one.
Okay.
Yeah, I found it. Thank you. So slide 9, you talk about that trees and shrubs will provide screening from adjacent property, but how long will it take for full-grown trees? Are these full-grown trees that are going to be planted or seeds, saplings?
Chair and directors, the city typically installs, it's a 2-inch caliper bald and burlap tree. I believe they're roughly 6 to 8 feet in height.
So they would take a long time to grow back to the height of the other trees around in the surrounding area?
Chair and directors, yes.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Heidi.
I have one final question. Help me understand easements versus right of entry. And when you're talking about us granting an easement, does that mean us selling you that portion of the land?
Chair and directors, good question. Easement with the city's looking to acquire a drainage and utility easement that just grants the drainage and utility rights over the easement area. It does not transfer fee title of the property to the city. So it just allows us to use the area for drainage purposes. And you mentioned temporary right of entry. That would be just granting the city temporary access rights. So it's slightly different than an easement.
I believe Dr. Anderson has some questions.
Yeah, thank you for being here tonight, for sharing your perspectives. I did have a couple questions. I'm wondering if you could put in perspective for me 6.5 pounds of phosphorus. I'm trying to envision what's a really big number and what's a relatively small number.
Dr. Anderson, Chair. So I think 6.5 pounds is significant. A rain garden is typically anywhere from 1/2 pound to 3/4 pound removed annually. So 6.5 pounds, I don't know, Mike, do you have a good barometer on what 6.5 pounds looks like outside of 6.5 pounds of something? It's hard to describe it.
I guess I wasn't very clear on my question. I'm more interested in knowing the impact of that. So in a similar setting, I mean, would 6.5 be on like, that's a really high amount of runoff, or medium or lower? I'm just kind of curious about kind of the relative runoff for a lake that size.
Yeah, go back to
Our goals there.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the goal. So the goal for this lake, or for the reduction that Plymouth has to have, is 105 pounds per year of phosphorus. So this is 6.5 pounds. So it's fairly significant for one project to take into account that much. The cities do stream projects that are very similar to this too, but they're much more expensive. So this is a fairly good cost benefit for removal of that amount of phosphorus.
So a follow-up question, I kind of missed your first number, the 150, was it?
105 pounds.
105.
So that is the goal that the city is required to reduce for our TMDL allocation for the lake.
Okay, for just
For
Gleason Lake.
Gleason Lake.
Okay. Could you tell me a little bit more about rain gardens? I'm sure I should know exactly what those are, but that I am interested in learning a little bit more. What's the physical appearance of that look like, and what's the science behind that?
Yeah, board commissioners. So a rain garden is essentially like a 10-foot by 10-foot or 10-foot by 20-foot area that's depressed between 2 feet and 1 foot below the road surface. The road water is then directed typically into that area. The water is then soaking through a soil media. A lot of times there are plants there to help take a lot of those pollutants out. Sometimes there is additional media in there with iron enhancements or other things to help further filter the water. And then typically in Plymouth, we don't have the greatest soils, and so you have to have a under drain or a drain tile underneath it that connects into a storm drain system like we're installing here. In other parts of the state and the country where you have better sandier soils, that water can just infiltrate into the groundwater without the need for a drain tile. However, it's roughly like a 200 square feet area where water is directed to for it to be filtered.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, do you have more questions? Oh, you have more questions. Can I just ask a quick follow-up question about your question?
You may.
I'm sorry. 105 pounds and 6 pounds. 6 doesn't sound like a lot of 105. So I just want to make sure that I understand your answer to Dr. Anderson. A minute.
Yep, board commissioners. So it doesn't seem like a lot. However, these lakes were impaired over decades. And so it's going to take us decades to try to get at all the water quality improvements that we need. And so projects like this, you almost have to do this 6.5, 10 pounds and really work your way towards improvements to meet the goals of the TMDLs. There's very few projects that will get you 100 pounds of phosphorus removed per year that would have a direct impact on a lake like Gleason, where the entire watershed is basically fully developed.
So I may have a follow-up question to your follow-up question. Sorry. So with a goal of 105 pounds per year, is that new phosphorus introduced into the lake? Is that on an annual basis?
Yeah, Board of Commissioners, so it is basically a modeled number of how much the city has to reduce but to get towards the goal of the lake being off the list. So that is a modeled number. We do have to do actual monitoring in the lake itself to then have our efforts, whether it's a project like this, stream restoration projects, or others, that actually hit the goal. So, yes.
So as a follow-up, then the goal would be 105 pounds per year introduced into the lake.
Yep.
Assume then currently it's that plus some number. Do you have a feel for what that total number is annually?
Board of Commissioners, I don't offhand.
Okay, I was just curious.
So-
Maybe, I think this might be my last question, but I'm just kind of curious for the residents that are immediately on the shoreline of, is that the right way to frame it, the edge of the lake, where their homes are immediately on the lake. I'm just curious the nature of the feedback or input that may have come to the city of Plymouth or over the years recently in regard to concerns about the quality of Gleason Lake, and maybe some of the, if there have been such inputs, what are some examples of those inputs? What would those residents right on the lake be offering input or perhaps voicing concern or complaint about?
Yeah, Board of Commissioners, so I think I'll defer to Mike on this immediate neighborhood. However, just anecdotally in conversations with folks that do live on the rest of the lake, I think that the general consensus is the lake has a lot of algae, and algae is a symptom of excessive phosphorus. And so while they haven't commented on this project specifically, there has been desire from folks that live and work on the loosely aligned Gleason Lake Association to support projects that Plymouth and others are doing to help improve water quality.
Okay, thank you. I do have one more, actually. As someone who grew up on a farm, I probably should know the answer to this, but I'm curious the source of the phosphorus. Is that from runoff from lawn fertilization, or are there other natural sources where that phosphorus accumulates?
Yeah, Board of Commissioners, it's really all the above. So stormwater runoff, whether it's excessive fertilizers, grass clippings, pet waste, sometimes in more rural areas, there's septic systems. So there's a lot of things that really lead into phosphorus pollution. However, in an urbanized area, typically it's going to be your sands, your grass clippings, and a lot of the excessive fertilizers that happen.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a follow-up to the follow-up to the follow-up question. I'm still not understanding how 6.5 pounds of phosphorus removal, which is about 15% of the goal of 105 pounds, is enough. Am I missing something?
And, I thank you, Chair and Directors. Each of these projects do introduce some form of phosphorus removal, but I do want to get back to the permitting requirement that is driving this improvement is the MS4 permit from the Pollution Control Agency. That is the driver for this water quality improvement.
Okay, so you are meeting their minimum requirement, although your goal is much higher than what you would achieve with this pond. Is that correct?
Chair and Directors, the stormwater pond, the treatment required, as you alluded to earlier, does exceed the permitting requirements based on the requirements of the storm pond design itself. That also does have a positive benefit by removing phosphorus that would drain towards Gleason Lake. So I would say that the stormwater treatment basin would exceed our permitting requirements.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments, follow-up questions, comments?
Maybe just one more, sorry. I'm wondering, I understand not always having the information immediately upon receiving the question. I'm just wondering if one of you could follow up with me just in regard to what the total new introduction of phosphorus is calculated to be into Gleason Lake. And the goal, I think I'm understanding it correctly, is 105 pounds per year. And this project would reduce whatever the current amount is by 6.5 pounds per year. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question? Again, guys, I just get this really simply. We need to replace the sewers. And there's there's aging infrastructure, and we're just not there. So we have a lot of important work to do around sewers. Can we accomplish the sewers and doing what we need to do to serve the residents and to serve the community without putting in this basin?
Chair and directors, the city would also actually switch to this slide here. So to replace the storm sewer that does need to be replaced, the city would still need to acquire drainage and utility easement from the school district. It's a less impactful or less widespread easement, but if the school district were to grant that easement, we could replace the storm sewer. So we would repair that infrastructure, but we would not meet the treatment goals for the project.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you, gentlemen. I have one quick comment to make before I let you go. I know that the city is an environmental steward, so are many of us. I struggle with stewardship in terms of water quality versus stewardship in terms of cutting trees. So it's going to be a very, very difficult decision for me personally, but thank you for the information. I think that was a lot of sharing of data, information, and thank you, board colleagues, for the questions and the comments. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Next, Scott will talk about the long-term facilities maintenance LTFM program projects. Over to you, Scott.
Good evening, members of the board and Superintendent Anderson. Thank you for having us here tonight. Usually I'm the one talking the most, and I will be doing that after this presentation. But tonight I am joined by our Director of Buildings and Grounds and Transportation, John Deutsch, who will be going through the presentation for us.
All right, good evening, Chair, Directors, Superintendent Anderson. I am going to just go through a couple of informational slides as they relate to long-term facilities maintenance. Within your packet was some additional information that I'm not going to go through, but I provided to you. 3 of those documents came right from the Minnesota Department of Ed website that relate to this program. And then the 4th document was just a snapshot of the FY26 long-term facility maintenance budget. I'll go through this rather quickly, and then we'll be open to any questions that you have. So first of all, long-term facility maintenance, or what you'll hear me call as LTFM, is a program that under Minnesota Statute 123B, it provides the district an opportunity for either a levy or bond authority for projects as they relate to capital expenditures that exceed $10,000, maintenance projects that are necessary to prevent the further erosion of facilities. It'll increase accessibility within our schools. Health and safety and capital projects also now fall underneath this state statute. And then there is also by board resolution the ability to transfer funds for general reserve as they relate to general obligation bonds. So as we go forward, once approved by a school board, we have to submit a 10-year plan as it relates to our facilities. The 10-year should show that health and safety programs are being maintained. It should also look at accessibility, and it says that they're reasonable. It also says that you are moving towards becoming a more accessible facility. It also looks at deferred maintenance, and it looks at age-appropriate deferred maintenance, meaning that you have done review of your facilities, you have looked at condition and age as a factor. And then at the end of this, the school board chair usually signs a statement of assurance. This is all rather timely. We will be coming forward to you probably in the next month to have you approve the 10-year plan and also fiscal year 26, which is not this summer, but it's next summer's budget. Like I said, historically, this program has also been called Alternative Facilities. It was reserved for the largest school districts. In the past, it was reserved for the largest school districts that that had over 1.5 million square foot and average age of over 35 years. This has now been opened up to all districts in the state of Minnesota. But in order to, again, qualify, you are required to have a 10-year plan. So I add this slide not to go through this, but really just to show you all the different FIN codes that are associated with this program to kind of help you with what type of projects could or should be related to long-term facility maintenance. Now specifically regarding our district, as we look forward to FY26 and creating that 10-year plan, my department looks towards the business office to say, where do we want this budget to be on an annual basis? And it can range depending on need, depending on other things that are happening in there. But currently right now we're on about a $15 million a year track. This is where we start our parameters as it looks towards those different areas. And you can see that some are higher. A lot of it is just the cost of those parameters. It's not which one's more important or which one's got higher priority. And I can guarantee you that none of our budgets specifically come down to here's the parameters. It never works that way. We'll have a large roofing project that'll be over $2 million just based on need, things like that. So long-term facility maintenance revenue may be used for the following types of projects. It can be for deferred maintenance projects that will, again, prevent further erosion of facilities. That's a very important term that actually comes right out of state statute. It will increase accessibility. It will maintain your health and safety projects in the district. And as of FY25, it does allow for the remodeling of either single-use or gender-neutral restrooms. What it cannot be used for, it cannot be used to construct new facilities, remodeling or purchase of portable classrooms. It also cannot be used for lease purchase agreements. It does not allow to be used for energy efficient projects. Now I say that would be the primary focus. Obviously, if I replace something today, it becomes more efficient. That's just the way that this is. It also cannot be used for violence prevention, facility security, ergonomics, or emergency communication devices. So one of the things I wanted to show is as we create our 10-year plan, there's a lot of a backstory here that looks at this, and we look at multiple different things that play into this. We do facility need forecasting, looking at what our facility is going to need going forward, capital request meetings, which we have with every building. We look at age versus life expectancy. Every building material has a life expectancy. Every building material has an age of which you should be then considering to replace. Historical data of maintenance costs. We actually have a work order system. We can look back at our work orders that we get. This relates to a lot of plumbing fixtures. This relates to a lot of our mechanical systems, things like that. Also, we do building surveys. Either the district does them or we have third-party consultants that will do them for us, depending on the level of expertise needed. So all of this kind of comes into play and we create this 10-year plan. So status of our 10-year plan as we are today. Since 2010, we have been part of this program. We are currently in the process, like I said, of updating it, and we will present it to you. Over the last 10 years, the district has spent somewhere between $90 and $100 million in LTFM. So we are averaging somewhere between $8 to $12 million a year. Periodically, you'll see it increase a little bit, but that's sites or project specific. So about $8 to $12 million a year, which I will tell you in the 10-week summer is extremely difficult. So that is why you're starting to see projects happen during the school year where we can do them safely without impact, looking at nights, things of that nature. So our next step will be May, June. We will come present our approval for the budget. You'll sign the statement of assurance saying that you have reviewed it and that you're good with what's on it, and then we'll go from there. So that was that's just a really brief overview of what it is, and Scott will offer any additional comments you have or questions.
Perfect. Thank you, John. I think I would just highlight too, John has a huge job for the district, as we know, with all the buildings and facilities that we have. If we've been in them, and someone coming from other districts, Wayzata's facilities are in excellent condition. I think that's the number one comment when I'm at even my kids' facilities and talking with their coaches and the other parents. They're always like, when I tell them I work at Wayzata, they're like, man, you guys have facilities, and holy smokes, everything is so nice. So I think that's a big testament to John and his team. They're overseeing a ton of needs, a ton of wants, and I think they do a great job of keeping the facilities in really good working order. So, and then kind of on that, just a reminder with these LTFM dollars, when we look at these projects, when you see the variability, it is another complexity inside of that for John is that he has a very short window of time in the summer to do these projects. And then from an accounting standpoint, our fiscal year ends June 30th. And so sometimes we might be trying to spend or try to get to all those projects, but it depends on the timing of everything. So that's why you'll see a lot of variability from year to year where, percent of completion up to that June 30th date, we might not finish those projects in that time. Another thing, like John mentioned, is just the timing of projects, trying to do some during breaks or trying to disrupt the least during the school year. It also allows us to get some of the projects done, and it also saves some dollars because those companies, I don't know, John, if you'd speak to that, but we're able to see some additional savings.
Yeah, as is in the economy today as it is, I mean, the labor force is reduced. So a lot of the stuff that we do during the school year, during the nights and weekends and things of that nature are based on needs that the contractors had provided to us. So a case in point, I mean, if you look at, if you've been to the high school over the last couple of weeks, I mean, there's a significant size crane there right now for a roofing project. It takes a little more work on our end to kind of coordinate all that and work through all that. But at the end of the day, we will be at the high school roofing that building for 7 years. So it's really hard to not try to do things outside of a normal, outside of that summer window. One other thing I would add is I know I talked about, we've done somewhere between $8 and $12 million a year. Seems like a lot. If you were to ask some of our consultants or partners, they would say that in order to continue to maintain our facilities at the level that we have, we could get into the range of $20 million a year without really feeling like we're gaining ground. So I challenge my staff a lot to say, this is what you have to work with, and we can do it. But it's that piece of it. It's making sure that we're prioritizing effectively, making sure that we know our facilities, making sure that we know what conditions our facility's in and what we should expect. Another thing is, like, for our roofing projects, we as our base spec, we ask for a 20-year no dollar limit warranty. So we are under warranty on our roofs for 20 years. Year 21, we better start to get a budget for a roof to be replaced, or at least have a budget for maintenance on that roof. And we've done a really good job of, when we do that, a lot of times we will still meet current energy code, but we're not going to replace all the insulation. If it's not wet, if it's not damaged, we'll do the extra work to make sure that we're doing what we need to do and accomplishing the goal, and not just to spend the money.
As it relates to the roofs, this is kind of a separate conversation for a later date, but just keep in mind too with the roofs, if you've watched the news or read anything online about it, Minnesota is the worst place to be insured right now in the United States of America. We just sat in a meeting a week and a half ago, and they do not, it is now, it's not full replacement on roofs unless they're past, John, is it 70% replaced?
It's 70. They have to be 15 years or newer, at least 70% of the roof.
Yeah, just because it's been such a losing battle, don't quote me, but I believe they said for every dollar that they collect in premiums in Minnesota last year, they paid out $1.70. So it's just something else. I think it just really speaks to the job that John has with his team to keep everything up to date. And I would just remind too, from a public perspective, LTFM, this is a way to keep our dollars in great shape. So you look at it and you think that's a big cost. It is a big cost, but it would be a much bigger cost if we didn't touch our buildings, because as you know, those dollars are set aside specifically for that. Otherwise, we'd be pulling that out of our general education revenue, or we'd be letting our schools kind of degrade to a point we'd have to go out for a bond issue and do bigger, much more costly things. So perfect. Any questions for us?
Yeah. May I just weigh in? I'd just like to weigh in on one thing from a staff perspective. So I think it's important for our viewing public to know that a lot of these dollars, if not most, are used for things that you really never know ever happened, whether it's roofs or the air ventilation systems, climate control, some other things like flooring and painting, and some of those things obviously are a little more noticeable or observable. But I think I'm accurate in stating this, but if not, feel free to correct me. But we have a pretty robust environmental process within buildings to ensure we have high quality air within the buildings, adequate ventilation, all of those types of things that contribute to the general health and well-being of our students and staff in those buildings. And in the event that there is an issue that would be uncovered, the LTFM dollars, I think, can be utilized to mitigate whatever issues there might be, replace the like for like, and install systems or other features in a building that would get it up to the highest of possible quality. Is that accurate in what I stated?
Superintendent Anderson, absolutely. So as a case in point, I've been here since 2012. When I started, I was fortunate enough the 10-year plan was created, and we were just kind of taking it from there. But we have been able to add dehumidification to many of our buildings that didn't have it, or all of our buildings that didn't have it. We've been able to upgrade all of our ventilation systems. And on top of that, there is a process called recommissioning that allows us to use an engineered study to look at our systems to make sure that they are actually functioning as they were designed 5 years later, 7 years later, and then fix anything that's happened. So we've been able to do this, and fortunately, like during the COVID timeframe that we went through, all of our systems, because we had brought our systems up, were meeting current ventilation code. And it was a very small tweak of the system, just basically saying we just want to bring in a little more outside air. Filters and all of that have been upgraded. So we really didn't need to start to go through and look at some of these more trendy type solutions, because we had a system that met current code, which requires so many air changes per hour, per space. And along those lines, we do, because we have to maintain our health and safety program, we do have an indoor air quality coordinator that's in the district. My health and safety coordinator serves on that role. And so she actually will investigate any indoor air quality questions or concerns that come up. And we use like carbon dioxide and other trends within our building automation systems to monitor those so we can see what it was going back. And the nice part about it is her and I, while we're in the same area, are kind of separate. She comes from that vision. I'll come from more of the building operation vision. And between the two of us, I feel like we've been able to resolve, mitigate any concerns that come forth. I'll also mention the fact that, we just got done doing our 5-year testing for radon and lead and water in our schools, things like that. I mean, we're doing hundreds to thousands of samples and coming back with very few. Part of that is because we are replacing our plumbing systems in our schools, and radon is 100% related to when you don't have good ventilation systems, when you're not providing outside air to those spaces. It's a naturally forming, gas that it's not like you can just move somewhere and it goes away. You have to have great ventilation in order to keep those air quality in our schools the way they are.
I think I would just add a couple other things, just because it is something that we talk about. John walked through the eligible uses for these funds, but just from a cost containment standpoint, these aren't dollars that could be used for classroom teachers or to make to cover some of the cuts that we have. They're very specific for uses that we've talked about, and we're grateful from a public perspective that we're able to use those to really focus in on the projects that are necessary to keep the district buildings and facilities in good operating order. Secondly, I would just add these dollars that aren't used when we talked about, my brain always goes to fiscal and then the financial statement and then the budgeting. But those dollars that aren't used, because when our fiscal year crosses and depending on how far we are into those projects, those dollars might look like they're sitting on our balance sheet in our audit, but they are then adjusted on the levy. So if we levied for 16 million and we only spend 10 million, that comes off of next year's levy. Does that make sense? So it doesn't sit in a fund balance. My only problem is I always push John to get everything done by June 30th. Otherwise, it makes it look like we don't know how to budget. So I'm being silly and kind of serious because we'll budget for what we think we're going to get to. And of course, as John says, there's so many different constraints and variables that can come up that maybe we only get through a portion of that. So if you just looked at ran revenues and expenditures kind of on their face, it would look like we were way off in some areas, and it's due to these projects. I just mentioned that because when we come to budget presentations in the future, those will be some things I'll point out as well.
Thank you, both John and Scott. I agree with Scott that our facilities, our buildings are an envy for other school districts. And as Dr. Anderson mentioned, I'm so happy that we are using the LTFM dollars, not only just to make the buildings look nice and clean, but also take care of the children's and the staff's health, right? And that, I think that is very important. I will circle back with a couple of questions that I have on my own, but I will ask my board colleagues if they have any comments or questions.
I just would like to echo what Dr. Stahoni said, that, our buildings are amazingly well kept, and thank you for that. If by chance, a parent or somebody does see something that maybe needs repair, would it be safe to say that the reason is because, number one, you don't want to do things during school? Number two, could be supply chain issues. Are there any other reasons? I mean, we have funding to repair things. So if something's not being done, it's not, it's not because we don't have the money for it or because you don't know about it. Could you maybe elaborate?
Yep, I will. I'll take that question. So it's a great question. A lot of times, what it comes down to is where has it been communicated, and we've tried to provide as many options to communicate as we can. We have a work order system that any staff person can put work orders in, and once those work orders are in, they're there. They can't be deleted, anything else. But along those same lines, we have a 10-week window in summer. So depending on when something may break, it could be a supply chain issue. It could be the fact that it's going to require a little bit longer time in order to fix. I can think of a couple of projects just recently. One was Central Middle School, where we had some exterior doors that just, they just rusted. They just rusted through, and when they failed completely. It literally was somewhere between a 12 to 14 month supply chain issue. So we had done as well as repairs as we could. And then you send, 300 kids through the doors over a 2-week period. And it just, we're back there fixing it. So it's pieces of that. I have a great maintenance staff. I have great staff in the buildings. I feel like they have the perspective they need in order to make sure that they are seeing what they need. And then we just find the time to do it. So as a case in point, like I just got a update today. So like on our work order system, we have about 90 work orders out that are outstanding right now that are open. That is about what I would expect to see on a regular basis. We get to the beginning of the school year, we're probably close to 200 to 250, just because they all rush in at once. But then as the year goes on, so I mean, out of those 90, probably half of them are less than a week old.
Thank you.
I would like to clarify, I'm still learning. My understanding is money, if you are taking money, I mean, if a project is less than $2 million, it still come for LTFM, it still comes from general fund. Am I right?
I can answer that. That's basically just, it's all general fund, but it's a specific funding. So you're accurate in saying that it's general fund, but
It's a
everything
separate
is
fund?
kind of housed in our general fund. So that is split off. The 2 million or over goes into the separate fund, but it's still all funded by the same dollars. It's just from a tracking perspective, and maybe John can add more to that.
Along the same lines as it's a different tracking perspective, MDE has different requirements for projects over $2 million. We go through a much more strenuous approval process. They're asking for engineering notes and things of that nature. And it goes into a different finance or different budgeting code at that point. So a lot of that is driven by the MD's requirement for like a more strenuous approval process. That still is kind of a hangover of when we were doing ventilation projects and they wanted to see that you were doing the right thing. Department of Ed was extremely involved in that with Department of Health and MPCA in terms of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and that we're actually doing it correctly. And there used to be 2 individuals from the Department of Ed that would come out and walk facilities on an annual basis. That's when there was only like 17 districts doing this. Right now it would be too cumbersome for them to be able to do that. And we wouldn't be able to wait for them to be out every 3 or 4 years. So, but that's really where that is coming from. My understanding is that those larger projects, MD, they just want that separate so they can focus on those.
I think on that note too, even though it's in something referred to as a general fund, it's a very specific goal or target that those dollars can be used for. So maybe separating it from general capital dollars, which can be used only for these projects, versus general operational funds, which are what could be used for staff, teachers, et cetera. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate. I think kind of what we're focused, kind of getting to your question. Inside of the general fund kind of lives everything. So you have assigned, restricted, unassigned. And so this would be one of those restricted funds that can only be used for these specified purposes. So it couldn't be, it's really easy to, and I need to do a better job of explaining it at presentations. And you'll see it coincidentally in a slide coming up, but there's so many things housed right inside of that fund area. So to chase this point.
Is it just like a separate piece of pie, so to speak?
It absolutely is. Yep, it's a separate thing right inside of the general fund.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question. So Ezra, thank you for bringing this to the full board as part of this work session today. So our next steps are going to be to approve the FY26, right? And then the full 10-year plan. When should we anticipate seeing that?
John looks at me. It's required to be to MDE by, I believe, by July 31st. I think traditionally we brought it in June or July. That would probably be consistent this year as well.
Yeah, I look at him only because it is about 90% complete right now. And in all honesty, years 6 through 10 really get to more of a district-wide concept. We don't know where our facilities are going to be at that point, but the interesting point of that is it's also trying to find that perfect spot to be able to say, okay, here's where we're at. FY26 is a year away, so we hold on as long as we can just to make sure that we have what we have budgeted correctly. one of the saving points of this is MD does allow for us to move money around between buildings as necessary, as long as we stay within those finance codes. So for example, if I have $1 million in roofing, we ask for, we have 2 schools that are getting $500,000 each. All of a sudden, a third school has an issue that we didn't know about. We're able to stay under that $1 million and say, okay, we're going to divide this 3 ways now, some of that. So that helps, but we try to wait as long as we can. So it's usually in June when we bring it.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Talking about the energy efficient things that we are not allowed to use LTFM money for, I assume this refers to things like solar panels and stuff like that. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. What it's referring to when I say we can't use it as a primary thing for energy efficiency, when I replace a boiler in a school, it is more efficient than the boiler I took out. When I replace a water heater, it's more efficient. I can't go and say I want this water heater and I want to increase the efficiency to 90 or 100%, which is going to cost X number of dollars. The standard is, here's the water heater that would come. So that is exactly what it is. Roofing projects have insulation requirements, things like that are higher now than they were 25 years ago. So it cannot do any type of energy efficiency in terms of solar, wind, any of those types of things.
Or roof improvements that would make them more efficient.
Yep.
And it also applies to like for like. So if the school district found money to put on a solar panel and then needed to maintain it or replace it or repair it, you couldn't use LTFM money even in that case when you already have one. Like for like does not apply. Is that correct?
Specifically for solar panels, I can tell you no, it does not, because it's been asked. People have used ways of justifying things to be able to say that and say, hey, we have a solar panel now, I want to replace a solar panel. It's considered an energy efficient project at that point, and so they would say no.
I mean, I know you're not the one who makes that decision. It just seems the district could be saving money in many ways. So it's strange to me that there's that restriction.
To add to that though, at some point I would be willing to present and look at our energy costs or our utility costs, and I can show you specifically where replacing a boiler has made a significant improvement in our utility costs. I will tell you right now that our consumption is lower than it was 5 years ago. Now our cost is higher, but again, I can't help that. But our consumption is significantly lower.
In that connection, I want to clarify. My understanding is also if you install, let's say, that solar panels on the roof, then it's going to be quite expensive project to change the roof because you have to remove solar panels before so that you can do your job on the roof. Am I right?
Yes, it would be an added cost to do that. And I think that would be a questionable expenditure at that point too. So that's why if there was the look for solar panels, that is part of the reason why we went with the 20-year no dollar limit. I've done that for many years just because it gives you a long period before you really need to ever have to consider putting more money into something like that. But yes, you would. The other part of that is anytime you put anything on your roofs, it has to be considered to make sure, one, structurally your building can handle it, and two, that it isn't going to deteriorate your building in terms of faster or quicker than what just a normal wear and tear would be.
Thank you.
Scott, for a procedural process, will we approve 2 LTFM long-term plans, meaning we'll approve the Wayzata plan, but then do we also have to approve a part of the District 287 plan as well at some point?
That's a great question. That will actually be coming to the May board meeting. That was just sent over, I think, last week. And so our goal is either to have that at our May board meeting or a special meeting before the work session in May.
Okay.
But yes, you'll be seeing that.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a comment as well. I think about what it takes for my house and its little square footage, and then the 5 users, and how we navigate all those honey-do lists and all those routines. And then I think about thousands of feet with thousands of users, and I just can't underscore, John, how lucky we are to have you in our district. I've seen you make decisions where you think about the impacts of teachers and you integrate kind of what's happening to them so that their quality of life and their daily experience is good, which translates to our students. And then how you think about the ebb and flow of the district. It cannot be understated how lucky we are to have you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments.
Comments? If not, I have 2 questions, John. One is on slide 6, the last item. What is HNS?
HNS is health and safety. Sorry,
Health and safety.
that is the health and safety side of it.
Okay, thank you. And then the second question is, so you said we have had LTFM dollars since 2010. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so since then, how much has the LTFM revenue grown? Just an idea. Well, how much was it then, and how much was the last amount we got approved?
There were years back in the early in the year 2010 to 2016. We were doing large scale ventilation projects, so we were in the $12 to $15 million at that point too. A ventilation project at an elementary school, just think one of our elementary schools, like a Greenwood, is probably in the range of, back then, $6.5 million in order to get in and to do everything that we were doing. That was a lot of other associated systems, but so we've maintained this level since 2010.
So in my mind, I'm trying to think, I'm comparing the funding formula increase or lack thereof for the last 15, 20 years. How does that compare with the LTFM increase? Does Scott have an idea?
John, you can chime in, but I think they're kind of 2 separate things.
Right.
Because this is generally funded just by the levy. It's always something we're taking into consideration. So when we're looking at the tax impact for our taxpayers in the district, we're always looking at where this kind of lines up and how that kind of comes in alignment with what the district's goal is and what the board's goal is with the impact to our taxpayers. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so would it be fair to say that the taxpayers have been more generous than, say, the legislature in terms of the funding formula?
I don't know that I would say that. We definitely have as we all know, a very supportive public, which we're very grateful for. I think it's allowing the district to keep things in good operating order. And like John said, with our partners and our consultants, we'd have to spend more even to keep it up. But I think they do a really good job of it. And then I think I would just add the only downfall is we always try to stay in a certain range. So there's the tax impact that we try to keep in check, if you will. But obviously with inflation and other pressures, we've been able to do more or do less with those dollars. So
Okay.
You would add to that.
No, I think that's what you said is we've used LTFM to kind of level that tax impact piece. In order to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, like we have the ability to do $25 million to $30 million of LTFM, but it wouldn't make sense to do that. And part of that is because if you have a large lump in 1 year, 20 years down the road, you're going to have to recreate that. And so the best thing you can do is create a program that just kind of smooths out over everything. So I replace carpet, I'll come back in 15 to 20 years and I'll replace that carpet again. And it's an ever developing. So we joke in my office that, when we create our budget, it should be easier now because we've been doing this for 12 to 15 years, and it's just going back and looking, what did we do in 2012? And let's make sure that what we did there, that we're ready to replace some of these finishes that only last 15 to 20 years. So
Thank you. That answers my question. Any other comments, questions, more colleagues? No? Yes, comments.
I just wanted to comment on Sarah's earlier mention of District 287 and District 287 is an intermediate school district, as I know both of you know, and the board knows as well. I'm just curious if it would make sense to just give a quick high-level summary of the process for LTFM dollar revenue generation for intermediate districts. It's a little bit different process. Thus, we need to do two different plans per Sarah's input.
I'm not fully, I don't fully know how they operate. I do know that they can go underneath of us. Coming from a cooperative at Meeker and Wright Special Education Cooperative, we were able to have our districts levy on behalf of us. I believe that's similar in nature. And so we would always come to that and be able to use those dollars for certain projects that the cooperative have going on. So John, I don't know if you could add to that, but that would be probably my understanding. I can come back to the board with a definite answer at our May board meeting.
That's exactly it. My understanding is that there's two separate plans. I don't have to do anything or worry about anything with 287, but basically under state statute, they have the ability to levy a levy authority under the district and to do that work. But they have these same requirements, same parameters, and you know, it's again, you approve it so that it is approved at a public meeting. So, and it really doesn't impact us. I mean, there's not even a conversation about what are you doing compared to what am I doing. We just we build our plan and we go forward with it. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, and thank you, Scott. Next item on the agenda is the Wayzata Special Education Finance Review and Update, and this will be presented by Scott.
Just have to say, as John's leaving and Jen's coming up here, I just want to thank my team too, because I think they love the collaboration and how we all work together, but that means we all work together a lot. And so I just want to thank them for being here kind of outside of their regular hours. So Jen, John, thank you for that. So, all right, well, this will be a mixture of myself talking a lot and then Jen Welk here sitting with me, but we wanted to bring this to the board. There was a question at the last board work session regarding special education, because I'd made some comments in my board presentation about just we're seeing costs start to increase substantially, and then talking about the recent legislation. So we didn't want to come with next year's projections, so just full disclosure, this doesn't get into next year's projections. We're still very in the middle of that, working with our budget teams on those as John kind of mentioned, even with the budget development. Some people would say, well, why don't you bring it in May, or why don't you bring it in April? We're kind of waiting until the absolute last minute on a lot of stuff as we learn things, as we have better numbers, as we're working with teaching and learning and HR and other areas. So we really kind of focus in towards the end. So I don't want to get into next year's budget projections. And then the other thing, this will be kind of geared more towards finance, so we won't get into the programmatic side of special education, but that could be another great topic for a work session in the future. So perfect. All right. Well, as I mentioned, I've got Jen Welk here. So I know I said this at our finance committee, the board meeting last Friday, but when I came to Wayzata Public Schools, I came in my past from a district where I was the director of finance. And then when I went to a special education cooperative that dealt with federal funds and state special education funds, I realized the massive complexity of that area. So when I came to Wayzata and I learned of Jen Welk and her understanding and expertise in that area, I immediately tried to find a dotted line from my team to her, and successfully did that. And then successfully, now Jen reports directly to me, which is fantastic. Jen's been in the district for 27 years, with 25 and a half directly related to special education. So the district's lucky to have her in this capacity, and I'm lucky to have her on the team. I say that because this is an underfunded area. This is an area that we're required to provide services, which we absolutely do, but we are not made whole. As I always kind of say, if I keep giving you $1 and you keep giving me 75 cents back, I'm probably going to stop giving you $1. So you can see it's a really challenging area, and there's lots of complexities into it. So we are very grateful for Jen's partnership and taking this on. All right, next slide. I don't think I can, oh, I can control that. It's a lot of power, Amy, so thank you. All right, perfect. So first off, we're just going to start. You'll see a couple common slides from last month's presentation on the 25th, but we'll just kind of start with the budget team for the state special education. And in this presentation, we're focusing just on state special education funds. So if you worked on our team, you'd be very familiar with UFAR's code, Finance Code 740. So this is where we're focusing. We're not diving into the federal funds. We're just solely focusing on the state special education expenditures and revenues. We'll do a quick background, a 101 on state special education funding. As I said, as you guys have heard so many times, even with my predecessors before me, Minnesota school finance is very complex. So I always tell the joke, even with 2 master's degrees, I thought I was a fairly intelligent human, and everybody told me it would take 2 to 3 years, and I think it took me 4. So I'm kidding, I hope it didn't. But it definitely took me 2 to 3. And then when you go into state special education funding, it's even more complex. When I decided to take the opportunity at Masico, one of my mentors actually said, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole, what are you doing? And so again, just kind of giving Jen props, but it's a complicated area and it takes a lot of working with our partners, with Jenny Nias and Stacy Voss and her team, just to all stay on the same page. And then we'll go into past and current state special education costs and counts as it related to Wayzata Public Schools. All right, you've seen this slide in a few of my presentations already. The reason that you'll see it in most of the slides is because it's important just to understand the dynamics of the district and how we have the different funds and how they work together. So as you guys have heard me in past presentations, the general fund is the fund where everything's kind of housed. That's what we're talking about when we talk about cost containment. That's the general operations of the district. When you go down to food service fund, that's our Wayzata Cafes. Community service fund, that's our community ed that you saw Jenny Ebert come and present on, and then Michelle Sagadol came in with the food service fund. And then our building construction fund, which would also tap into what Valentina had mentioned about projects over $2 million. That's where our building construction fund, that's where those dollars would live with LTFM. And then of course our debt service fund, which self-explanatory. But our special education costs are actually right inside of our general fund. So those live right inside of there. So I always just like to point that out. All right, budget planning. So the team that works on special education budgets, as I mentioned at our budget planning session on the 25th, we kind of take a decentralized approach where we work directly with the experts in that area. As I've mentioned several times, Jen Walk, we're lucky to have her on the team, and she works directly with Jenny Nias's team. So I don't know, Jen, on a weekly basis, you meet with Jenny and you...
Jenny and I meet every couple of weeks, but again, dotted line to her with any questions, and she knows she can come to me with anything as well.
Perfect. And they actually office right next to each other. They share a wall. So that works out really well. So how the team works on the budget together. Jen, I don't know if you kind of want to talk about the collaboration between the departments. You mentioned that you met with her, but once we get into budget planning, it's kind of a regular conversation where you're kind of going through staffing.
Absolutely. Staffing is a joint effort between Ginny, myself, Scott, as well as a handful of people on that team that we work together to make sure that the staff being hired are appropriately licensed. We have to have that in place in order to get reimbursement back from the state on that, and then through as the year is going on to make sure that those staff are continually working with the students in special education. They have to track everything they do so that we can prove that they are in fact working with students with IEPs.
Perfect. And that is that system. The state obviously doesn't just take our word for it. So we have our UFAR system where we can code people to, and then we have what you see up on the screen, CEDRA, which we have to constantly update. And that's where you'd put the actual license information on the individuals, their costs, number of hours, number of days. And then the state can do variance testing, and they can kind of determine that those costs are eligible. And that's what the revenue's generated off of. These staff also, as Jen said, have to track their time because they have to be eligible staff that are working directly with special education or special education students. And I should mention, please stop me on any of these slides if you'd like. All right. You might have to click the link, Amy. But I've got a short video here. So before Amy clicks on it, I don't know how many of the board members got to view this video, but it's just a short video, and it's through the association that our office belongs to, and business offices across the state, but MASBO did it. Just to note, this is prior to the new legislation last spring, so I'm sure they'll be updating this video. But I think it does a good job for the board members and for the general public, simplified version of kind of how SPED funding works in Minnesota. Oops, scroll down. Yep. Perfect. And then just hit play.
No two students entering our classrooms have the same skills, abilities, or learning styles, and we know we need to help every student reach their full potential. Minnesota schools provide special education services to students with disabilities such as hearing or visual impairment, physical disabilities, behavioral disorders, or learning disabilities. The teachers working with these students have specialized training and may need specialized facilities and equipment to help with learning. This can be very costly. Minnesota state law makes it the responsibility of the school district to educate all students age 0 to 21, regardless of what the specialized services may cost. The state and federal governments have laws about how this needs to work, but they don't provide money to fully fund it. Explaining how schools are funded in Minnesota can be confusing. We'll try and make it easy. School districts receive a set amount of money per student from the state called General Education Aid. Because special education services cost more, the state, federal government, and medical assistance provide some additional funding. Even with these extra funding components, on average, only about 2/3 of special education costs are covered. Minnesota statute says that if the state and federal special education funds are not sufficient to pay for the cost of the programs, districts must cover the difference by using other general education revenue. This funding gap is known as the cross-subsidy. Districts must use dollars intended for other purposes to pay the additional special education costs to ensure these students are receiving the services they need. Special education needs are increasing, costs are rising rapidly, and the cross-subsidy gap continues to grow. As the gap grows, more dollars are pulled away from areas for all learners, including funding for classroom teachers, facilities, and technology. Districts across the state continue to have funding shortages because the state and federal government do not fully fund special education. The special education funding gap needs to be addressed so all Minnesota students have access to the best teachers and programs that position them for future success. It's just the right thing to do.
Perfect. All right. All right. So hopefully that video, I know that's a simplified version and just kind of updated. As I mentioned, that was done pre the recent legislation. So we are absolutely grateful for what the legislators gave us with being able to close that gap on the cross subsidy. The fact is that there is still a gap there. We are still required to provide services. And as I've mentioned prior, the district's seeing those costs increase, and that's what we're forecasting. So we're very appreciative for those additional dollars. But as I mentioned at the last board work session, the way that districts would have come out well on this is if special education costs and needs weren't really changing much, and you just had your natural steps and lanes of staff, their normal annual increases, and that would be your increase on it, and you would have gotten more reimbursement. The challenge is when you see larger increases with your special education spends with the higher needs, that amount that's not funded, that unfunded amount, roughly 25% right now, that's all coming out of general education revenue.
One other piece from that video is that we actually do serve up to age 22 now.
Perfect.
That was another change.
Excellent. Perfect. All right. So I won't spend a ton of time. Some of these slides are a little bit repetitive, but you'll notice that kind of in my presentations, and that's on purpose just to kind of hit on topics because they kind of all relate. But as was pointed out in the videos, all children who participate in public education in Minnesota, including children and youth with disabilities, generate general education revenue. So that's what we talk about all the time, where for Wayzata Public Schools, it's roughly around $10,000 when you factor in our levy and then the basic formula. In addition to that, that's where we talked about where when we have the needs, when we're meeting the needs of those students, it comes at a pretty high cost. And so those are the costs that the district takes on, and those are the costs that the finance team tracks and helps kind of keep in line. And that's what we put into the system to generate reimbursement for the district. So as a general rule, with the recent legislation, which I said was very helpful, we look roughly at about 25% of our costs not being funded at this point. And as pointed out, just that last bullet point, those remaining dollars are covered, that aren't covered by the cross subsidy. Those are covered by, could be unassigned general fund dollars. This is a really complex slide, and when I had this slide on there, I think I had comments like this. It's going to get confusing. So I'll kind of summarize this slide, but there's a combination of items that go into the calculation of special education aid. And then coming from a cooperative and talking about intermediates like 287, the funding to them is quite a bit different. They don't operate like we do. Their funding comes in different ways. And I would argue cooperatives and intermediates from a cash flow perspective, it can get really tight for them because they're break even by nature and they tuition bill out. And they also have to, like if they have itinerant staff, they're billing for those purchase services and they're doing a lot of estimating. So they get funds a different way. And then special education aid for us is based on prior year expenditures. So we're always in a different, like we always talk about in finance, we're working in 3 different years. We're literally still working on when, like this current year that we're in, Jen will be working in CEDRA that's due next November for last year's expenditures, which then we start to get aid in roughly January of next year. So it's very complex, and part of the reason for that is you have to see how the year kind of shakes out. Our fiscal year kind of drags on, and then those intermediates and cooperatives, they usually are the last ones to the table to get everything into CEDRA. And so by the time we know what those tuition bills are, there can be variability in those. And Jen, anything you want to point out that I missed, please let me know. So, and as we talked about, this is kind of appropriate from the last presentation we did on LTFM. Special education funds have to be used for specific purposes. They're very restricted in nature. And as pointed out on the slide here, they may not be used to provide services that are identical or similar to those provided to general education students. Jen, I don't know if you want to hit on anything on this slide.
Just what Scott said, it's specific to a student's disability-related need. So if there's curriculum in a classroom for spelling, but the special education student needs something different, we can pay for that different item, but we cannot pay for the regular classroom curriculum for the students.
Perfect. All right, and then other education, special education resources. So general education provides the major share of the funding for us. It includes basic, compensatory, operating capital, and many of the other revenue components, and that's kind of what we talked about when John was presenting on LTFM. But most of the basic revenue is unrestricted, and that funding is what is typically covered, is used to cover those dollars that aren't covered by the special education revenue that we receive. Compensatory dollars, they also just kind of noted there, they may be used to cover some of the costs of special education that are not covered by other sources. In our district, currently, we're using our compensatory dollars to cover all of our English learner uses. We've seen those dollars increase, but there's also a ton of unknown come after FY26. So I think districts are very nervous because the way that the program is run will change how they certify the students. And so for years and years, and Jen can probably talk to this better than I can, but we kind of had a consistent amount of compensatory dollars, and now we saw a big jump the last 2 years, and it's really easy to kind of get excited about that, but we have to be really conservative with that because we don't know the direction that it'll go once it'll go to direct certification. Perfect. All right, Jen, I don't know if you want to take maintenance of effort. Just before Jen talks, this is something that you'll hear a lot. This is kind of the world that we live in, but maintenance of effort is a really big deal for districts as it relates to special education.
So the maintenance of effort, or MOE, as we all call it, is a requirement that we must spend the same or a penny more from the prior year. It's their way of knowing that we are putting the required dollars towards those programs. It's relatively easy to do that just simply because the cost of staffing and benefits increases naturally every year. If you don't make maintenance of effort, they will take money back and you will not have federal funds eligible. You will not be eligible for special ed federal funds either. So it's a critical piece, and some districts have gotten into some trouble with that. Not here.
Perfect. Do you want to talk about the exceptions? So there are, and then I tell you that, and then I cut you off. These are, a lot of people will say, well, you know, if it goes down, what do we do? Or do we have options to do that? And Jen, you can kind of talk about those. They're pretty stringent with them.
Yeah, you have to, there's only certain things that the state allows you to dip below from year to year, and it's voluntary departure or retirements. It's in special ed only, we're talking about here, a decrease in enrollment or a termination of a large expense. If you have one student who is in a special program that's really expensive and they no longer need services, those kinds of things are there, but they will, if it's a voluntary departure or retirement, for example, we high dollar people and we bring in low people, you have to show the difference between those salaries and prove all of that in order for them to allow that exception.
Perfect. All right, tuition billing adjustment, maybe we can kind of tag team this, but tuition billing adjustment, our district has a really good handle on it. We are monitoring where our students are, so Jen can kind of interject, but the instance would be if you had students outside of your district that were being served by an intermediate or they were open enrolling to a different district, we would be responsible for those expenditures. So Jen, I don't know if you want to talk about how we track that.
So each school district is responsible to provide information to the resident school district via a tuition acknowledgement indicating that they are providing services for one of our students. And then our team is also invited to be on the IEP team for whatever district might be providing those services. And so everybody's in the know. We do residency verification for any tuition agreement that we have on a student who we may not have known was here in our district. So there's a close hold on that. We do have, and then we do the same on our end. If we happen to be providing services for a student who's not our resident, we'll invite that other district to be a part of the team and provide them an acknowledgement. And then the billing adjustment, and Scott can jump on here too, is that the state kind of does that all on their own. They keep track of what our expenses are and they do rates based on each disability area for each district. And then at the end of the year, it's just kind of a settle up.
Yeah, and the state took that back. I don't remember what year. I only know it coming from a cooperative because my predecessor there used to say they had to send out bills to districts and the districts would take their time to pay them. And as I mentioned, cooperatives and intermediates usually aren't sitting on a lot of cash flow. And so this would put them in kind of arguments with other districts. So gratefully, the state took it and does it kind of on the back end here. So I think that's a positive thing. Where districts can get in trouble, and you always hear it, is districts that don't have people in place or your smaller districts that aren't tracking the students as much. You can kind of get caught in January when they come out with those costs where you could have a really big expenditure come. If you were estimating $1 million, if it came in at $2 million, obviously that's having a massive direct impact on what you would have estimated for revenue. The cross subsidy, I won't spend too much time on this because we've talked about this quite a bit. The video kind of touched on it, and it's obviously been a hot topic item with the legislative action last spring. But the cross subsidy reduction aid really did help considerably. As you see there, kind of on the bottom of that, we went from roughly 60%, probably 60 to 62% reimbursement, just as a general rule for the district. It now hopped up to closer to 75%, and it'll probably get in that 85% range going into school fiscal year 2027. Obviously, that makes a big considerable impact for us. the challenge for the district and probably around the state is as we're seeing increasing needs at younger ages, our costs are increasing pretty substantially. So we're absolutely grateful that this aid came in, and it would have been catastrophic if it hadn't, but it's also important to recognize that the needs are also increasing. So the benefit is definitely there dollar-wise, but as we're seeing those needs raise, it kind of erodes those dollars that we're getting. Comparisons with other districts. So Jen, you can kind of hop in here, but this is kind of a dangerous one. This is one that you can't really look at. You can't look at Minnetonka. You can't look at Edina. You can't look at our neighbor, Osseo or Orono or any of those and say they're spending more per pupil than we are, or any of those variabilities, because there's a lot of different variables that could come into play. For example, your teacher costs could be substantially higher in one district than another, which then would increase your spend on kids. They might have more students attending intermediates or cooperatives. Jen, I'm not sure, but when did we take kids back from 287?
4 years ago, we brought back some students. We still have some students at 287, but that was a cost savings for us. But to keep going where Scott is that some districts may use federal funds to cover tuition billing. Transportation may be different depending on if you're using in-house or contracted services. So there's a lot of different things that could be different between the districts. And so I just caution from doing any comparisons on the dollars between us at any point.
Absolutely. Well, and prime example, and I know we talked a little bit about this on Friday, but even if you took a district closer to us and compared it to us, we have a much bigger footprint in our district. Our district boundaries is a lot more spread out. So naturally, our transportation cost is going to be significantly more than them. And then I mentioned teacher costs could be, and then a big thing, the programming structure could be different. It's all in, depending on the delivery of the programming at each district. All right, so now we kind of get into some of the dollars that we at Wayzata Public Schools, but this is a little hard to see, so I apologize. But as you can see on the screen here, we start back to FY19. We did that on purpose because we wanted to kind of see pre-pandemic. And then you can see kind of the impacts of the pandemic and then since then. So you can see we were growing, and again, this is just based on FIN 740, so this is our state special education aid. We increased roughly over $1 million, almost $1.25 million from FY19 to FY20. We had a slight increase in FY21 as kind of everything slowed down. And then Jen, I don't know if you want to talk to FY22.
Sure. FY22, we had a slight decrease. That was when we brought back our transition program into Wayzata, we had families that stayed at 287 until they finished that program instead of making that transition. So when they graduated out, we actually, that maintenance of effort that I referred to, I had to provide justification as to why we were less and had to show the tuition cost for each of those students that were at 287 to show that difference to be cleared for maintenance of effort. And so that really is what that decrease was for that 1 year that we dipped.
Perfect. And then from there, you can see in FY23, our costs, our actual costs that ended in FY23 compared to FY22 were almost $2 million more, so almost a 10% grow in 1 year. And then you can see on the original revised budget, we projected to go up $1.6 million. And then on our revised budget, over to the far right, you see that we adjusted again to encapsulate some of the positions added to address the needs of the students, and that jumped up $2.1 million from last year's final. So just in that 2-year period, you're looking at a $4 million add. And then, as I said, I don't want to get into projected for next year, but I can just tell you confidently we will be looking at a large increase for next year too along those same lines. So
I have a question. So where it says estimated cross-subsidy amount covered by general ed fund, that number, if I'm reading this correctly, reflects the increase amount for that fiscal year. Is that accurate? So if we're
trying to describe it, basically, if you take that 1.245 million and you multiply it by roughly 39%, that's what the general fund would have to cover. And then as you move to the right, once you get to FY24, then you're taking that 1.6 million and multiplying it by roughly 25%. And those would be the dollars that the general fund would have to cover. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and the main point I wanted to emphasize, I thought that was accurate, but that's not the total cross subsidy for the district. That only reflects the amount for that one fiscal year that was increased to the general fund because of the increase, because it would be a multiple of this amount. I mean, it would be that percentage of the top line of, for example, 1920, the 18,371,000.
Yeah.
The total cross subsidy would be larger than the 485,000. I just wanted to point that out, that that's just for the increase of that 1 year.
Absolutely. And just kind of add on there, this just shows obviously the impact of the cross subsidy that we did get. Obviously that helps, but you're also seeing it's coming at a time where we're seeing higher needs, which comes at a higher cost to provide the services. One thing that I'll mention, and won't get into the details of it, but we did, and I know Jen mentioned it on an earlier slide, but we are utilizing our federal dollars to cover tuition bills now, which just a really quick high overview, we're able to use, basically pay down our tuition bills that we'd have coming from other districts. We can pay it down 1-for-1 with our federal dollars. And then we take those costs that we were charging to federal and move those over to state special education to Fin 740, which increases our MO, so there's risk there. So this year we're planning on shifting $1.5 million of our federal over to pay tuition bills, which then will shift that 1.5 million over to state special education revenue. So we'll generate roughly 75% of that 1.5 million that we never received before. So it's obviously, if you're eligible to do it, not every district is eligible to do it. But if you do it, you can see that it's very advantageous to take that route. Obviously, like we mentioned, there is risk with that, and that comes in the when you talk about maintenance of effort. But we feel, based on the trajectory of how things are going, that that's a safe and calculated method to use. And we also know we could slowly peel that back if we needed to. Jen, do you want to kind of touch on this slide?
Sure. This slide is our child count, which we do every December 1st of every year. The students at that moment in time enrolled with an IEP are counted, and that is the number that they use when they're working with our state aid, special ed state aid. So this just shows the growth that we've had over the years, with the percentage on the bottom of our overall student population. You're going to see that those numbers look high when it talks about public enrollment being 13,347. This is our students who live within our district who are attending Wayzata Public Schools and other districts in the community or District 287. So anybody who lives here that's attending school there. So that's why the numbers may look larger than what our actual enrollment is. It also includes our resident district students who attend non-public schools. So all in, we have just over 15,000 students who are school age living within our district boundaries. And as of December 1st of 2023, 11.5% of those 15,000 students were receiving special education.
So you can kind of see from the data here that we are seeing an increase just as an overall aggregated percentage over the years. All right. And then one of our final slides here, Jen, if you would kind of want to talk about this one.
Sure. This is just showing all students who received special education within our district buildings, so whether they were a resident or not a resident, by any of our staff at any point during the year. So the number, again, looks higher because you could have had 5 kids this day, and then the next day there's 10 kids. And so it just kind of keeps adding and subtracting those kids off. We tend to see a growth during the school year, as we would anticipate to see, and then we see a drop always when we start the next school year. So we start the year down from where we ended the prior year, but then we grow back up through the year.
And that's that bottom line, the difference from end of year to fall, where we see kind of a natural trend of it declining when the fall starts. So one of the things to point out, and this is where it gets really complicated, when you look at this slide or you look at the prior slide, each student that's receiving services isn't necessarily like 1:1. So just because we have a new student, the services that they're receiving can be considerably different from student to student. So it's hard to kind of use a paintbrush and say, we're growing at a massive rate, which we're absolutely seeing an increase. But the next level question is what makes up that growth? So of that increase of 100 students, is it mostly speech services? Is it EBD, or is it other areas that need high address needs? But I just always, numbers can be, they can tell a story and they can kind of be deceiving at the same time. So while it's important to look at the growth, it's important to also ask the other questions as well. All right, and then kind of wrapping up the presentation. Next steps for us with the budget planning. Obviously, as I mentioned, we're heavy into budget season right now. That will go on through the month of May, and then we'll come to the board in June, but we'll continually be working on that preliminary budget for next year. This kind of highlights too, as I mentioned in our last, the March 25th board meeting, a preliminary budget is just that, it's estimates based on next year. As you know, we're making a lot of estimates and we're making a lot of assumptions based on information that we know right now. And as we all know, one thing I can absolutely guarantee you is by next fall, our projections will be wrong. So we can't look into the future. We wish we could, but that's why we're doing revisions. But right now we're taking the best information we can, and we're trying to use that information to project out our budgets. But we know that's going to change, and that's why we're constantly reviewing budgets. So when we've talked and we've had questions from the public, we're constantly looking at the budgets. So when you see a document, don't fall in love with it because it's going to change as we get more information. The numbers will not stay static. All right, and I think that is it. All right, perfect. Questions?
Yeah, thank you, Scott, and thank you, Jen. Board colleagues, any questions or comments for either of them or both? Yes, Dan.
Yeah, well, first off, very good information. I think this has probably been our most informative work session yet, so very grateful for all the content you provided. On one of the first slides of your presentation, you talked about kind of elements that we're seeing rising costs from and whatnot, and one of them you mentioned was transportation, especially like special education transportation. So just kind of a breakdown between kind of general education transportation costs, special education transportation costs. We've talked about how there's been a significant increase. Is one rising in its cost compared to the other? Are they both relatively the same in terms of their increase?
I don't know that right offhand. If John was here, he'd be able to answer that because we're currently kind of in negotiations process right now. But I think I can confidently say that our special education transportation will come in at a much higher percentage increase than our regular transportation.
Can I jump in quickly? Isn't that transportation cost covered completely, 100% special education, the MTS, the buses?
Yes.
Isn't that true?
Answer that. Do you want to answer that at all?
It is part of the state aid that we get. There's yes and no. It really depends on where districts fall under the different categories of how the state aid is calculated. Pretty close to it. I don't know what the rates are right now either, so I can't answer that question, but I did write a note to find out where we're at and what our growth has been. As Scott mentioned earlier, with the geographic makeup of our district, we are larger and we do have students who are on those buses, the special ed buses, getting to neighborhood schools that are not in their neighborhood area. So that does increase our costs, as well as the students that we continue to have at District 287, we provide transportation for them as well.
Okay. Perfect. But as a general rule, you're absolutely right. It is pretty much fully funded. To give you an idea, that's roughly $5 to $6 million a year for the district.
Yeah, Sheila.
To make sure I understand you correctly, the district pays for our current special ed needs using money that was calculated based on our needs from last year. And that is essentially the crux of what makes this so difficult and why growing or having more students every year like a double problem?
Yes, that's an accurate statement. In the state's defense and MDE's defense, I don't know how they could do it any other way until you see final cost, but you're absolutely right. It creates a challenge for us if you're growing with those needs that obviously your funding's always going to lag.
And do we know where the added needs are? Like, where do we expect this to level off at any time? I mean, I know it's unknowable to some extent, but could you share what we're seeing more of that's creating this increase?
I apologize. I wouldn't be able to get into that. I think that would lead more to the programming. But I know on Friday when Jen Welk and I and Jenny Nias talked about, that was something we talked about would be a great thing to come back to the board with at a later work session to kind of talk through some of those things, because Jenny Nias and her team would be able to kind of talk directly to that. I can say as kind of a general statement, it seems like the costs aren't going away or slowing down at any point. Just from being in meetings earlier today, it seems like the needs are increasing.
Thank you.
I might be somewhat repeating my the previous board colleague, but my question is, I see that explanation of special eds are coming. I mean, as an example, it's students who have hearing and visual impairment, physical disabilities, behavioral disorders, learning disabilities, etc. In what kind of category you see more increase, and what do you connect it to?
Again, I would probably shy away from answering the question, just because I feel like that would be a more programmatic side that Jenny Nias and her team would be able to answer. So I apologize for that.
Sorry, I put you on the spot too. Sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? I have a couple of questions. Scott, I think initially you mentioned that you will stay away from the federal aid when you were talking about the FIN 740, but a couple of times you talked about federal aid because it was necessary. So, for example, the federal aid that we get for, you said we qualify for that to be transferred to the state, whereas some districts don't. Can you explain how we qualify, why you qualify?
Jen, do you want to take that one?
Are you referring to the tuition
Yes.
billing?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Some districts are considered hold harmless from 2016 when MDE changed the funding formula. Actually, Wayzata fell into that category for a few years where you were hold harmless, meaning based on the way that they changed the calculations, you were not going to get less than what you had gotten the year prior. So during that time frame, we were not eligible to use our federal funds to pay for tuition billing. And then this year we were deciding to do that to help offset those costs. So what Scott meant about the 740 is this presentation was just kind of around the state special ed staff, but we do have an allocation that we get from the feds for additional items that we can do above and beyond what we do for the state. And so now we're going to use those dollars to pay for the tuition for our students attending elsewhere.
Okay, thank you for that. The second question about federal aid is let me see if I can remember the full form. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, that was passed, I think, like in the 70s or something like that. We are required to provide that assistance. And the state says they will provide, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 40% of that aid, but we have never received anything more than 15 to 17% or something like that. Is that still true? The IDEA funding? Do you know?
I think that's kind of how I recall it too, is that originally back in the mid-70s, I think it was 1975 when the IDEA passed. Yeah. I think the language was, and I can't say I've read through it recently, but that the federal government would pay up to 40% of the costs of special education services. And I think the high watermark on that has been about 19%. So I don't know if those are exact numbers of what the federal reimbursables have actually been. So it has required that more of that funding come from the state and the local school districts as a result of that. So I know that we talk to our state legislators regularly about working with the federal members of Congress to take a look at the special education reimbursement laws and to find ways to increase that amount that does come back to states. But I don't believe it has really modified the percentages very much from the federal government.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. But
Did that sound?
Yeah, and I apologize. I kind of separate the two into different buckets, just because with federal dollars you have to spend before you can go in and draw, and we receive minuscule funds for our federal, even comparative to what we spend on our state funding.
Right. But the main idea for me was to have the community and the viewers understand that there's another area that we are so short of funding, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of builds into cost containment as well. That I would argue that Wayzata was inequitably harmed during the pandemic based off of the criteria that they allocated the ESSER, CARES, and other governmental dollars that came out of the pandemic, because we received such a smaller amount that also bled into our compensatory dollars, which districts were able to, districts have plenty of eligible costs and statutorily eligible costs to use compensatory dollars on. So we didn't get those dollars, and some of those pandemic related dollars were able to use to supplant, and districts didn't have the impact. So as I've talked about, and not to digress, but it does directly relate to the pandemic in the sense that we lost a ton of kids. We lost 200 kids. We didn't get the 250 kids. We didn't get a lot of pandemic dollars. And then those other ancillary funds, such as compensatory, we didn't get like other districts did as well. So it was kind of a perfect storm.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. Yes, Heidi, go ahead.
Okay, so this is going to be really focused on the process of budgeting. So help me understand this. So you have to make projections based on an imperfect science of knowing how many kids with needs are going to be coming into our district. We know we have some information around what last year looked like and those students that are continuing. And we know based on enrollments coming in or new families that are coming in. So we've got some information. So there's a little bit of wiggle room of what we don't know, right? What happens when you lock into your budget? So if we don't budget properly or conservatively enough, where does that money come from for that given year?
Well, kind of to simply answer, it will just come from, so in the example, let's say we budget right now, and then we would have a higher population of special education students come in the fall, we'd be required to meet their needs. So we would provide the staff for those. And then those additional dollars that aren't covered would come out of the general education revenue.
Okay, and that's why that general fund balance is really important for us as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
I do have one final comment. Thank you very much for this presentation, and thank you for the Special Education 101. I think it'll be, from a finance standpoint, that's really good. And I do really look forward to us having the programming coming in. It's as we get into these conversations about our funding, it gets just really dicey and concerning, because we're providing really quality services to students that are really amazing students. And as we start to talk about dollars and where they're spent and what we're doing, I get really nervous about the conversation that we're having. So thank you for making sure that we always have the money to spend for our students, because that's really important. And Dr. Anderson, I look forward to hearing a conversation about the quality of special education services that we provide our community.
Any other questions, comments? No? Thank you both. Your hard work, Scott, as always, is appreciated. Thank you, Jen. And we look forward to that programming work session, though. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And it helps to have a great team. So thank you.
All right. Finally, in the finance and operations reports, we have Scott telling us about enrollment and housing study preliminary ideas.
All right. I, for some reason, spaced that, so I apologize.
You know,
it seemed like I was getting up.
How about I kick off on that? And in fact, I think we can make up a little bit of time here, because this is not intended to be a full-scale report. It's more of an update. So I'll maybe take the lead on this one, Scott. You've been getting a lot of prime time here tonight. So I'll help you out here with this one. But I just wanted to give the board and the community an update to let everybody know that we are on the front end of engaging in an enrollment and housing study. We've done a number of these over the years within the school district. I've lost count, actually, how many times we've done these reviews. Oftentimes we'll do them if we're feeling a need to do a more comprehensive facility study, or perhaps expanding a building or the number of buildings that we might have, because we really need to get a good picture of what our enrollment is looking like into the future, as well as what the city governments that are part of our school district, what their housing patterns are looking like for the coming years. So during the time I've been here, I think we saw some numbers earlier. There were about 9,500 students in 2008 approximately. Now we're pushing 12,500, working toward 13,000. So we've grown quite a bit. We did a number of enrollment and projection studies and housing studies along the way to help us gauge where is the growth going to be. And again, we work with city planners and city governments to get a good feel for how many expandable acres of potential residential property are there yet within the communities. During the time I've been here, Plymouth has pretty much filled up. Not completely, but to a large degree. Maple Grove has filled up as well, for the most part, with some exceptions. Corcoran has grown rapidly, the portion of Corcoran that's within the footprint of our school district. And the city of Medina has been growing as well, and that's where the greatest future expansion capability is going to be, although we continue to hear from them that there'll be kind of a modest rollout date or timeline, maybe when compared to what we were experiencing in Plymouth and Corcoran and Maple Grove for a number of years. So we need to do this again. Our timeline is starting sooner than later on this probably, and having that wrapped up. I think a housing study probably, and an enrollment study could take maybe 2 months or so to do a comprehensive review of that. So from the time that we might get started, we could anticipate that timeline. And then there's kind of a second partner project or process, which is the study of our current attendance areas. And we've been through a number of attendance areas as well here in the 16 years I've been here. In the previous district I worked in, I was there 16 years, and we never once changed attendance areas. And here I think we've done it probably at least 6 or 7 times in the past decade and a half. So I do believe we're on the front end of needing to do that again, because we do have some underutilized buildings and we have some crowded buildings. So we're going to need to take a look at where our growth is going to be and where those attendance lines are, and probably even do some of this work prior to the 25-26 school year in regard to changing those boundaries. So we really need to have a good understanding about our current enrollment, what the patterns might look like in the future, and which buildings are will have more capacity for more students, and which ones we may need to try to bring some relief to. I always like to give reminders, and I know the board's well aware of this because you hear me say it often, but we do own property in Medina that's large enough for both an elementary and a middle school, and at some point I would say both of those buildings would be a reality. This preliminary process of enrollment study is to help us gauge, okay, how far out in the future are we when we might need that? Keep in mind it takes maybe 2 years to build an elementary, closer to 3 years to build a middle school. So we have to know what we're going to need 2 to 3 years in advance, and then do our very best to project what those numbers might look like. And before we do that, we just want to make sure that we're maximizing our current facilities. And this process that we're on the front end of for the time being will help us know, again, what changes we might need to make and what timelines we may need to give consideration to adding an elementary and or middle school to our fleet. So anyway, I wanted to give that update. We've been in the process of meeting with organizations or consultants that provide these services. We're looking at the importance of determining that interconnectivity between the enrollment study and the boundary change. As I think all of us are aware, we've had some internal capacity for reviewing attendance areas and doing some of the enrollment growth and projections. The person who had been doing that for us has retired, so we no longer have that same level of internal capacity. So we are likely going to need to rely more on consulting services to help us both with the enrollment study, which we've always done, the consultant for that, but then also probably for the boundary changes as well. So that's about the level of detail that I can share with you on that for the time being. It's still in progress, but I did want to give an update to you and to the community so that you all know that we're working on this, and stay tuned. There will be more forthcoming, and I probably left off some things that Scott was thinking we should say that maybe I didn't. So I will turn it over to Scott with any other things that you may want to add.
No, I don't think so. Honestly, I think you covered everything. So just the timelines and the importance of doing it.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Board colleagues, are there any questions or comments? Anybody? No comments? All right. Thank you, Scott. I think now.
Thanks, Scott. No, I think you're done.
There are no other administrative reports today, but we do have a school board report. Director Kader will present the table of contents for the school board handbook. Director Kader.
Thank you. So, board colleagues, as you'll know, we have been talking about developing a board handbook, a WPS board handbook for some time now. It is one of the action items that came out of our board development session that was in November with our previous board. And so this is kind of just, you'll realize that board work kind of builds from one board to the next. And so we are continuing that vein of what we're trying to do for board development. And so this is going to be a great place to be able to hold a lot of the information that board members, as they're coming on and need onboarding, will be able to access. This is a draft. I want to emphasize that it is a draft. And the way that it was developed was by benchmarking with 2 other districts that are of comparable size and kind of similar functioning as Wayzata in the metro area. And also, I relied heavily on what has been used in the past in our December organizational meeting. So there's nothing really new here that we haven't seen, but it's just kind of a placeholder for everything. So steps forward on this is that each one of these sections is going to get built out with information. It will be compiled into a handbook, and everyone will have access to it. The way that it's going to get compiled is through, we're going to utilize our, we've got a committee right now, right, that does the superintendent evaluation, board compensation, and also does board development. And so that team of people will continue to work on this, and we'll bring it back in bite-sized chunks to work sessions to be able to review it together. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to direct them towards me or to the Superintendent Evaluation Committee.
Questions, colleagues, comments? All right, I have a couple of questions, couple of thoughts on this. So this is not a final table of contents, right?
It is a draft.
So, okay, so 2 questions. One is, can you share the 2 districts that you looked at?
So because they're still working on theirs as well, I don't really want to call them out publicly.
Okay.
But they are, I can certainly tell you offline.
Yeah, but so they are not final, they don't have.
They have not finalized, no.
Okay. Second question I have is, when can I suggest, or when can anybody else suggest an addition to this table of contents? Can I do it now?
Anytime.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how I have struggled many times during my 2.5 years to try and remember acronyms. So is that something that you can perhaps add as one chapter?
Yeah, I think we could.
LTFM, LEA.
Yeah, I think we could. I think sometimes when you're developing a handbook, and I've done this before when writing policies and procedures and whatnot, you have to be careful not to try to create an encyclopedia of information if the information is held elsewhere. But I think if it's something that's within the parameters of this, it could be useful.
Yeah, I think that's something that we could discuss actually at the May 2nd meeting or whenever, right, as a board. If it is useful for the board, I think we should just consider that. Though.
Sure. Sure. I guess, so since we brought up the May 2nd meeting, just a reminder to everybody, we have a board development session that is coming up on May 2nd. The agenda will be published soon enough, and it's going to be a tight agenda. So we're going to have to keep to our topics and make sure that we're staying on track because, as you guys all know, we always run over time. And so I want to make sure that we spend enough time on the items that we have on that agenda and really get through them in a good way. Thank you all.
Any other questions, comments? If not, thank you, Director Kader. That completes our agenda for this evening. It is now 6:33. The Wayzata Public Schools Board of Education work session for April 22nd, 2024 is adjourned.